"Don't sell the house," the oldest man whispered, his voice trembling despite the confidence that had built billion-dollar companies and argued before the highest courts. "Not until we open Mom's last box." The attorney standing at the front of the quiet room slowly removed his glasses, uncertain why four of the most respected men in America suddenly looked less like successful professionals and more like frightened little boys. Outside, church bells drifted through the crisp October air of Ashcroft, Georgia, a town so small that everybody noticed when a stranger parked on Main Street. Today, however, strangers weren't arriving one at a time. Black SUVs stretched along the curb outside the courthouse, polished enough to reflect the golden leaves falling from the old maple trees. Curious neighbors gathered behind the white picket fence, whispering to one another. Some recognized the logos on the vehicles. Others recognized the faces stepping out of them from television interviews, magazine covers, and charity galas. A nationally respected heart surgeon, a federal judge, a technology entrepreneur whose software had changed classrooms across America, a decorated fire chief known for leading impossible rescues during natural disasters. No one understood why four men with lives scattered across different corners of the country had all returned to a forgotten southern town on the very same morning. Even fewer understood why none of them smiled. They walked side by side without bodyguards, cameras, or assistants, their polished shoes crunching softly across the gravel path leading toward the old courthouse. Their expensive suits could not hide the grief resting quietly on their shoulders. An elderly woman standing near the entrance leaned toward her friend and whispered, "Who do you suppose they came here to see?" Her friend answered almost automatically, "Nobody important ever stays in Ashcroft." Neither of them realized the truth had been living only 3 streets away for more than 20 years. Inside the courtroom, sunlight poured through tall windows, illuminating tiny particles of dust floating peacefully through the air. The room smelled faintly of aged oak, old paper, and fresh coffee from the clerk's office across the hallway. The attorney carefully placed a weathered cedar box onto the wooden table before clearing his throat. "Mrs. Angela Brooks left specific instructions," he said gently. "She asked that this box remain sealed until all 4 of her sons stood together again." The words settled over the room like a soft blanket. None of the men reached for the box immediately. Ethan Miller lowered his eyes, his fingers tightening around the edge of the table. Noah Carter swallowed hard, as though speaking had suddenly become impossible. Liam Brooks stared quietly at the faded brass latch, while Caleb Johnson slowly removed his firefighter badge from his jacket pocket and placed it beside the box with unexpected tenderness. The silence lasted long enough for the ticking wall clock to become the loudest sound in the room. It was the kind of silence only love leaves behind. Finally, Ethan spoke, almost too quietly to hear. "She always knew we'd come back together." Noah gave a small nod without lifting his head. "She waited longer than anyone should have to." Outside, more townspeople gathered near the courthouse steps. Reporters had begun arriving after hearing rumors that 4 nationally recognized leaders had unexpectedly reunited in Ashcroft. Microphones appeared. Cameras clicked. Everyone searched for an explanation worthy of headlines. Had they purchased land? Were they announcing a major investment? Was a famous politician coming to town? None of the guesses came close. The truth wasn't about money, politics, or business. It was about a woman almost everyone in Ashcroft had forgotten. Years ago, when the paint on her tiny white house had already begun to peel and the porch swing squeaked with every breeze, Angela Brooks had quietly walked into a county children's shelter, carrying nothing but a worn leather purse and a heart nobody could measure. She wasn't wealthy, she wasn't powerful, she wasn't famous. But before the sun set that afternoon, she would make a decision that nearly everyone around her called impossible. And decades later, that single act of quiet kindness would bring 4 extraordinary men home, leaving an entire town wondering whether the greatest legacy a person could ever build had nothing to do with fortune at all, but everything to do with choosing to love the children everyone else had already given up on. 22 years earlier, the Ashcroft County Children's Shelter stood quietly at the end of a narrow road lined with towering pine trees whose branches swayed gently beneath the warm spring breeze. The brick building was clean but worn, its white paint fading beneath years of southern sunshine. Wind chimes hanging near the front porch produced a soft melody every time the breeze drifted through the yard, where a rusty swing set stood motionless despite the bright Saturday afternoon. Angela Brooks parked her 12-year-old pickup truck beneath the only oak tree in the parking lot and turned off the engine. The truck rattled once before settling into silence. She remained in the driver's seat for a long moment, both hands resting on the steering wheel. Her paycheck from the elementary school cafeteria was folded neatly inside her purse. She already knew exactly how much money sat in her checking account because she balanced the numbers every Friday night with careful handwriting inside a small notebook. It was not much, certainly not enough to impress anyone, but she had learned years ago that kindness had never asked permission from a bank balance. She stepped out wearing simple blue jeans, comfortable sneakers, and a light yellow cardigan that had been mended twice at the elbows. The shelter director, Mrs. Evelyn Harper, greeted her with a warm smile that slowly faded into concern. "Miss Brooks," she said gently, shaking Angela's hand. "Before we begin, I want you to understand that these boys are not easy placements." Angela smiled softly. "Children are not furniture, Evelyn. They are not supposed to be easy." Evelyn sighed quietly, leading her down a hallway decorated with colorful drawings, graduation photographs, and handmade Mother's Day cards left behind by children who had eventually found families. The air carried the comforting scent of fresh cookies, mixed with laundry detergent. Somewhere down the hall, a radio played an old gospel hymn at low volume. The building felt peaceful, yet beneath that calm rested an invisible loneliness shared by every child waiting behind those doors. They stopped outside a recreation room where 4 boys occupied 4 different corners, as though invisible walls separated them. None of them spoke. None of them played together. Ethan Miller, only 11 years old, sat near the window reading a science book that had lost its cover. Noah Carter, 10, carefully repaired a broken toy truck, with remarkable patience using only a paperclip and clear tape. 8-year-old Liam Brooks quietly sketched birds in a notebook, with a pencil worn almost to the eraser. Little Caleb Johnson, only 6, hugged a faded stuffed bear so tightly it seemed like the only thing keeping him anchored to the world. Angela noticed something immediately. They were not difficult children. They were careful children. Children who had learned not to expect anyone to stay. Evelyn lowered her voice. "Every one of them has been returned." Angela looked back slowly. "Returned?" Evelyn nodded with visible sadness. "Different reasons every time. Too quiet, too emotional, too withdrawn, too much responsibility. Some families wanted younger children. Others wanted only one child. Some simply changed their minds." Angela looked through the glass again. Ethan glanced toward the hallway for less than a second before returning to his book, almost as if hope itself had become too exhausting. Noah kept repairing the tiny truck with complete concentration. Liam erased part of his drawing and began again without frustration. Caleb never looked up at all. Angela felt something tighten quietly inside her heart. Evelyn continued, "They are good boys, respectful. They help clean up after dinner. They make their beds every morning without being asked. But after enough disappointments, they stopped believing anyone comes back." Neither woman spoke for several seconds. Sunlight streamed across the polished hallway floor, creating long golden rectangles that stretched toward the recreation room door. Finally, Angela asked the question that surprised even the shelter director. "Do they have to stay separated?" Evelyn blinked. "What do you mean?" Angela smiled gently. "If they already trust one another, why should they lose that too?" Evelyn hesitated before answering. "Most families only want one child, sometimes 2. Nobody has ever asked about all 4. Angela rested one hand against the cool glass, watching Caleb quietly place his stuffed bear beside Liam's chair before sitting down again without saying a word. Liam responded by gently sliding one of his colored pencils across the floor toward Caleb. No words. No attention drawn to the gesture, just kindness offered naturally between children who understood invisible hurts. Angela felt tears gather behind her eyes, not from sadness alone, but because she recognized something deeply familiar. Love did not always arrive with grand speeches. Sometimes it looked like sharing the only blue pencil you had left. She inhaled slowly, squared her shoulders, and turned back toward Evelyn with a calm certainty that surprised them both. "I did not drive all the way here looking for the easiest child to raise," she said quietly. "I came looking for the children who needed someone to stop leaving." Mrs. Evelyn Harper stared at Angela for several seconds, searching her face for even the smallest hint of hesitation. But all she found was quiet conviction. She folded her hands together and slowly nodded. Then there are some things you deserve to know before you sign anything. She led Angela into a modest office where afternoon sunlight spilled across shelves, filled with worn binders and framed photographs of smiling families. A coffee maker hummed softly in the corner, filling the room with the comforting aroma of fresh roast. Evelyn opened 4 thin folders and placed them side by side on the desk. "These files do not define them," she said gently, "but they explain why so many people gave up too soon." Angela sat down without opening any folder. "Tell me about the boys instead." Evelyn smiled faintly before beginning. "Ethan is the oldest. He reads constantly because books are the only places where people never leave halfway through the story. Every foster parent praised how intelligent he was, but they also said he worried too much for someone his age. He always tried to protect the younger boys, even when nobody asked him to." Angela glanced toward the window, imagining the quiet boy holding his science book like it was a shield. Evelyn continued. "Noah fixes anything he can find: broken toys, flashlights, old radios. He believes everything deserves another chance, even when people stop believing that about him." Angela could not help smiling at that thought. "That sounds like a remarkable quality." Evelyn nodded. "It is, but one family said he spent too much time taking things apart. They thought something was wrong with him because he preferred building over talking." She gently touched the 3rd folder. "Liam hardly speaks unless he trusts someone. He draws instead. Every picture has birds in it. We asked him why once." Evelyn paused before quietly answering her own question. "He said birds always know where home is." Angela lowered her eyes as emotion settled warmly inside her chest. The final folder remained unopened for a long moment. "Caleb is the youngest," Evelyn said softly. "He carries that old bear everywhere because it was left beside him when he first arrived here. Nobody knows who placed it there. Every night he whispers goodnight to it before he falls asleep. Some people thought he was too attached." Angela looked directly at Evelyn. Or maybe he was simply grateful something stayed. Silence settled gently between them. Outside, laughter echoed from the playground where a few younger children chased bubbles floating through the warm Georgia air. The sound felt bittersweet inside those office walls. Evelyn finally pushed the paperwork across the desk. "Angela, I have to ask something difficult. You work in a school cafeteria. Your house has only 3 bedrooms. You live alone. 4 growing boys will need clothes, school supplies, food, medical care, and college one day if they choose that path. This will not be easy." Angela smiled with the peaceful confidence of someone who had already counted every possible cost before walking through the front door. "I know exactly how much money I have." Evelyn looked puzzled. Angela continued. "What I do not know is how much love these boys have gone without. That worries me far more than my grocery budget." Evelyn looked down, blinking away unexpected tears. During her 27 years running the shelter, she had heard countless conversations about tax credits, adoption expenses, and government assistance. Almost nobody had ever spoken first about loneliness. The paperwork remained untouched while Angela asked another question. "Do they eat dinner together?" Evelyn nodded. "Every evening at 6. Do they choose to sit together?" "Always." Angela stood and walked back toward the recreation room. Through the glass, she watched Ethan quietly helping Caleb sound out difficult words from a picture book, while Noah carefully adjusted one of the loose wheels on Liam's toy airplane without being asked. None of the boys noticed they were being observed. They simply cared for one another because that was who they had become. Angela rested her hand against the cool window and whispered almost to herself, "They already found their family. They just do not know it yet." She returned to Evelyn's office, picked up the adoption forms, and signed every page with slow, steady handwriting. The scratching sound of her pen seemed almost ordinary. Yet with every signature, 4 separate futures quietly changed direction. When the final page was complete, Evelyn looked at the documents before looking back at Angela. Most people spend months deciding whether they are ready. Angela carefully capped the pen and smiled with gentle certainty. Sometimes children cannot afford to wait for adults to finish being afraid. The following Saturday morning, Angela's little white house felt smaller than it ever had before, yet somehow warmer. 4 second-hand duffel bags rested beside the front door while sunlight poured through lace curtains, painting soft patterns across the old hardwood floor. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon pancakes, fresh biscuits, and maple syrup, scents that had always reminded Angela of fresh beginnings. She had spent the previous evening rearranging every room. Her own bedroom had become the boys' room, while she moved into the tiny sewing room at the back of the house, where a folding bed barely fit between an old dresser and the window. She never mentioned the change. To her, comfort was something meant to be shared. Ethan entered first, carefully removing his shoes without anyone asking. Noah paused beside the porch, studying the squeaky screen door before quietly tightening one loose screw with a small screwdriver he carried in his backpack. Liam stood silently in the yard, watching a pair of bluebirds building a nest beneath the porch roof. Caleb remained close to Angela, clutching his faded bear with one hand while the other held tightly onto the sleeve of her cardigan. Everything about the house was simple. The dining table had scratches from years of use. The refrigerator hummed loudly whenever it started. The couch had been patched more than once, with fabric that did not quite match. But nothing felt neglected. Every picture frame had been dusted, every blanket folded neatly. Every room carried the peaceful feeling that someone cared enough to notice small things. Angela knelt beside Caleb with a gentle smile. "There is only one rule in this house," she said softly. 4 pairs of eyes turned toward her. "We take care of each other." The boys waited for more rules. Bedtimes, chores, punishments. Instead, Angela simply smiled again. "Everything else we can figure out together." Ethan looked surprised. "That is all?" She nodded. Kindness makes the other rules easier. Later that afternoon, she walked them through each room. "This cabinet is where we keep school supplies. If you need pencils, take pencils. If someone else needs the last one, leave it on the table instead of hiding it." She opened another cupboard. "Cookies are not forbidden. Just save enough so nobody feels forgotten." Noah blinked. "You are trusting us?" Angela laughed softly. "Trust grows when someone gives it first." During dinner, the boys sat nervously around the old oak table, unsure whether they should begin eating before she did. Angela noticed immediately. She reached for a biscuit, broke it in half, and smiled. "Around here, food gets cold if we spend too much time worrying." Quiet laughter filled the room for the very first time. Even Caleb smiled while spreading strawberry jam across his biscuit with complete concentration. After dinner, Angela handed everyone a small dish towel. Ethan immediately started washing plates. Noah dried them. Liam stacked them neatly inside the cabinet. Caleb carefully carried silverware one handful at a time, concentrating as though performing an important mission. Angela leaned against the counter watching without interrupting. No rewards, no speeches. Just 4 boys naturally helping because someone had finally given them a place worth caring for. As the weeks passed, neighbors began noticing the changes. Every Saturday morning, the boys worked together in the front yard, planting flowers, trimming bushes, or repainting the old fence with leftover paint donated by a hardware store owner. Mrs. Linda Foster from across the street watched from her porch one afternoon before shaking her head. "Angela means well," she told another neighbor. "But 4 troubled boys under one roof, that never ends well." Mr. Dawson folded his newspaper and nodded. "She should have adopted one. Maybe 2. 4 is asking for heartache." Their voices carried across the quiet street, but Angela never answered. Instead, she kept watering the flowers while Caleb carefully followed behind her with a tiny watering can almost as large as his legs. One evening, Liam quietly left a folded drawing on Angela's nightstand. It showed the little white house beneath a bright blue sky with 5 birds perched together on the porch roof. Across the bottom, he had written only 4 careful words. "Home is where staying happens." Angela held the drawing gently beneath the warm glow of her bedside lamp. Tears gathered silently, but they were not tears of sadness. They came from the realization that children rarely needed perfect houses, expensive toys, or grand promises. They needed consistency. They needed someone who came home every evening. Someone who remembered birthdays, packed lunches, attended school concerts, and tucked blankets around sleepy shoulders before turning off the lights. As she placed Liam's drawing inside the family Bible she kept beside her bed, Angela whispered a promise into the quiet room. As long as this house is standing, none of you will ever have to wonder whether someone is coming back tomorrow." The years did not become easier, but they became fuller. Every season left its mark on the little white house. The pencil marks on the kitchen doorway climbed higher each birthday as the boys grew taller. The old dining table collected fresh scratches from homework, science projects, and countless family dinners. Every morning began before sunrise. Angela packed 4 lunches while oatmeal simmered on the stove and the smell of fresh coffee drifted through the quiet house. By 6:30, Ethan was reviewing math homework at the table. Noah was repairing whatever neighbor had left on the porch the day before. Liam was sketching robins gathering outside the kitchen window, and Caleb was humming softly while feeding crumbs to the sparrows. Money was always carefully counted. Angela accepted extra shifts during school holidays, cleaned the church fellowship hall on weekends, and baked pies for the local farmers market every Saturday morning. She never described those jobs as sacrifices. Whenever the boys thanked her, she answered with the same gentle smile. Families do not keep score. Still, there were evenings when she quietly sat at the kitchen table after everyone had fallen asleep, balancing bills beneath the warm yellow light above the sink. Sometimes the numbers refused to cooperate. The refrigerator needed repairs. Ethan required glasses after his teacher noticed he was squinting at the classroom board. Noah needed tools for a regional science competition. Liam's art teacher believed he had extraordinary talent and recommended special classes in Savannah. Caleb had discovered a love for baseball and dreamed of joining the Little League team. Angela stared at the notebook, then quietly reached into a small wooden jewelry box. Inside rested the last valuable possession she had kept from her late mother's estate, a simple gold wedding ring that had remained untouched for years. The next afternoon, the ring was gone, and 4 new opportunities quietly took its place. Ethan received his glasses. Noah unpacked a used tool set from a thrift store that looked brand new after he'd polished every piece. Liam climbed onto a bus headed toward his first weekend art workshop. Caleb proudly carried his very first baseball glove home beneath the glowing afternoon sun. None of the boys knew where the money had come from. Angela never told them. One rainy evening, the power suddenly went out across the neighborhood. Darkness settled over the little house as thunder rolled gently across the Georgia sky. Caleb moved closer to Angela almost automatically. Instead of worrying, she lit several old candles and placed them around the living room. Their soft golden light reflected across smiling faces. "Looks like the electric company gave us permission to tell stories tonight," she said cheerfully. Ethan read aloud from one of his favorite adventure novels while Noah made shadow animals dance across the wall with a flashlight. Liam sketched the flickering candlelight in his notebook, and Caleb laughed every time the shadows changed shape. Outside, rain tapped softly against the roof. Inside, the little house glowed with warmth no storm could reach. At school, the boys slowly became known not because they were different, but because they quietly helped others. Ethan tutored classmates struggling with science. Noah repaired broken bicycles free of charge for neighborhood children. Liam drew birthday cards for elderly residents at the local nursing home. Caleb never forgot another student's name, especially if someone looked lonely during lunch. Their kindness spread almost unnoticed, until teachers began mentioning it during parent conferences. One afternoon, the principal smiled as Angela prepared to leave. "Mrs. Brooks, people often ask what special program your boys are part of." Angela looked surprised. "There is no special program." The principal smiled warmly. "Exactly. They simply learned how to care about people. Yet not everyone changed their opinion. Mrs. Linda Foster still watched from her porch with folded arms whenever the boys walked past together. "Just wait," she muttered one afternoon to another neighbor. "Teenagers always drift away. She is giving everything she has, and one day she will end up alone." Angela happened to overhear those words while collecting the mail. She paused for only a moment before continuing toward her front porch. That evening, she said nothing about the conversation. Instead, she served homemade chicken soup while listening to Ethan excitedly describe a science fair project, Noah explain how he had repaired the school clock, Liam talk about a hawk he had drawn that afternoon, and Caleb proudly announced that he had finally caught his first fly ball without dropping it. Angela looked around the crowded dinner table and quietly realized something beautiful. The house was still small. The budget was still tight. Tomorrow would still require early mornings and careful planning, but every chair around that old table was filled with laughter instead of loneliness. As she reached for the basket of warm biscuits, she understood a truth that no paycheck could ever measure. Wealth was not the amount left in a bank account at the end of the month. Wealth was hearing four boys who had once believed they were unwanted laughing together under one roof, completely certain they belonged. Time has a quiet way of changing a family. One autumn morning, Ethan stood in the driveway wearing a navy blue backpack and a scholarship letter folded neatly inside his jacket pocket. He had been accepted into one of the best medical programs in the state. Noah received an apprenticeship with an engineering company in Atlanta only 3 weeks later. Liam earned a full scholarship to a respected art institute after one of his paintings won a statewide competition. Caleb, now taller than Angela by several inches, was offered a position with a fire academy after years of volunteering alongside the local rescue department. Their dreams, once impossible to imagine inside the walls of a county shelter, had become real one careful step at a time. The little white house filled with cardboard boxes instead of school books. Suitcases appeared beside the front door. The hallway echoed with conversations about apartments, internships, orientation schedules, and long road trips. Angela listened more than she spoke. Every evening she folded another shirt, labeled another storage box, or stitched another loose button onto a jacket that would soon leave home. She smiled every time one of the boys talked excitedly about the future. But late at night, after everyone had gone to bed, she often lingered on the front porch swing wrapped in a light blanket, watching the porch light glow against the quiet Georgia darkness. The swing creaked softly beneath her, accompanied only by the steady chorus of crickets drifting across the neighborhood. She never cried. Love had taught her long ago that raising children meant preparing them to walk confidently beyond your front door. The first goodbye arrived before sunrise. Ethan loaded his bags into an old sedan donated by a retired teacher from church. Before closing the trunk, he walked back to Angela and hugged her longer than either of them expected. "Everything good I become started here," he whispered. Angela gently straightened his collar, just as she had done on his very first day of middle school. "Then make sure someone else feels that goodness someday," she replied softly. She watched until the car disappeared beyond the curve of Maple Street. The porch suddenly felt larger than before. 2 months later, Noah left carrying a toolbox that still contained several screwdrivers from the second-hand set Angela had bought years earlier. He held one of them up with a grin. "I am keeping this forever." Angela laughed warmly. "That old thing barely works." Noah shook his head. "It worked when someone believed in me." Liam's departure came quietly. Before leaving, he walked through every room carrying a sketchbook beneath one arm. He paused in the kitchen, touched the worn dining table, looked toward the porch where bluebirds still nested every spring, and finally handed Angela a framed watercolor painting. It showed the little white house beneath golden evening light, 5 birds resting together on the roof exactly as he had once drawn them as a child. Across the bottom he had written, "Some homes never stop calling us back." Angela traced the words gently with her fingertips before hugging him without saying anything at all. Sometimes silence carried more love than language ever could. Caleb was the last to leave. On the evening before his departure, he quietly replaced the old porch swing chain that had begun squeaking again. Angela watched from the doorway. "You never liked that sound," he said with a smile. She laughed softly. "I think I will miss it now." The next morning he picked up his duffel bag, then suddenly turned around and embraced her with both arms. "You never stopped choosing us," he whispered. "Not once." Angela rested her hand gently against the back of his shoulder. "That is what mothers do." When his truck finally disappeared down the road, the silence settling over the little white house felt different. It was not empty, it was peaceful. Days turned into weeks. Weeks quietly became years. Every evening, Angela still prepared dinner with the same care she always had, although she now cooked much smaller portions. 4 extra plates remained stacked inside the cabinet exactly where they had always been. She never moved them. Sometimes she caught herself setting 5 places at the table before smiling and quietly putting 4 dishes away again. On Sunday afternoons, she watered the flowers the boys had planted years before. The bluebirds still returned every spring. The old porch swing still faced the same quiet street. Neighbors often asked whether she felt lonely living by herself. Angela always answered with the same gentle smile. "A house can become quiet," she would say. "Love never does." Every evening, just before turning off the kitchen light, she glanced toward the family photographs covering the hallway wall. 4 boys had grown into 4 remarkable men, but in her heart they were still laughing around that old oak table, reaching for warm biscuits, sharing stories after long school days, and believing with complete certainty that someone would always be waiting for them to come home. Back inside the quiet courthouse, the cedar box remained unopened in the center of the table, while afternoon sunlight slowly shifted across its worn surface. None of the 4 brothers seemed ready to break the silence. It was Caleb who finally reached forward with careful hands, lifting the old brass latch exactly the way he used to open the cookie tin. Angela kept on the highest kitchen shelf. The lid creaked softly. Inside lay no money, no jewelry, and no property deeds. Instead, the box held 4 neatly bundled envelopes, tied with faded blue ribbon, each bearing a handwritten name in the same graceful script they recognized instantly. Ethan, Noah, Liam, Caleb. Beneath the letters rested dozens of photographs, carefully stacked in chronological order, along with report cards, crayon drawings, ribbons from school competitions, faded baseball tickets, dried wildflowers pressed between notebook pages, and a small spiral notebook covered in blue fabric. The room fell completely still. Ethan slowly picked up his envelope and unfolded the first page. The paper carried the faint scent of lavender, the same fragrance Angela had always tucked inside dresser drawers. His eyes scanned the opening lines before his breathing caught. "Dear Ethan, if you are reading this, then God has already answered the only prayer I repeated every night. You came home one last time." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, unable to continue. Noah quietly opened his own letter. Liam held his against his chest before unfolding it. Caleb wiped his palms across his slacks as though afraid he might accidentally damage the paper. No one spoke. The attorney quietly stepped outside, gently closing the courtroom door behind him, leaving the brothers alone with the woman who still somehow filled the room, despite no longer sitting among them. Ethan gathered enough composure to continue reading aloud. "You always worried about everyone else before yourself. I noticed the day you arrived. I hope you finally learned that carrying people is easier when you first let someone carry you." His voice cracked before the last sentence. Noah swallowed hard and began reading from his own letter. "You believed broken things deserved another chance. Never lose that gift. The world has enough people who replace what they could have repaired." Noah lowered his head as tears quietly landed on the paper. Liam unfolded a folded sheet tucked behind his letter. It was the very first bird drawing he had ever made as a child. Across the bottom, Angela had written one sentence in blue ink. "Every bird returns because it remembers where it first learned to fly." Liam smiled through tears, tracing her handwriting with trembling fingertips. Caleb's envelope contained something different. The faded red ribbon from his first Little League participation medal rested beside a short handwritten note. "You thought you needed that old bear to feel safe. Sweet boy, you never noticed that after a while you started leaving it on your bed when you went outside. That is how healing works. One day you realized courage quietly took fear's place." Caleb covered his mouth, unable to speak. Ethan carefully opened the small blue notebook lying beneath the photographs. Every page contained dated entries spanning more than 20 years. They were not records of achievements or expenses. They were memories. Today, Ethan stayed after school to help another student understand fractions. Noah repaired Mrs. Foster's porch light without accepting a single dollar. Liam gave away his favorite drawing because another child smiled at it longer than he did. Caleb held the church door open until every elderly member walked inside before he entered himself. Angela had noticed everything. Even the smallest moments they themselves had forgotten. As the brothers slowly turned each page, another realization settled over them. Mixed between family photographs were old receipts, tuition payments, medical bills, eyeglasses, art supplies, baseball registration forms. Every expense had been carefully saved. Yet beside each receipt, Angela had written not the amount spent, but one simple sentence explaining why it had mattered. "Worth every penny to see him smile. A dream is never too expensive. Children should never apologize for growing." Ethan quietly reached the final page of the notebook. Only one paragraph appeared there. If these pages ever find you together again, promise me one thing. Do not spend your lives repaying me. Spend them becoming for someone else what someone once became for you. Love only grows when it keeps moving. Silence filled the courtroom once more, but this time it was different. It was no longer the silence of grief. It was the silence that comes when a truth finally settles deep enough to change a person's heart forever. Four accomplished men looked around the room at one another, no longer seeing a surgeon, a judge, an entrepreneur, or a fire chief. They saw four frightened boys who had once walked into a little white house believing they were too difficult to love, never realizing that one extraordinary woman had quietly spent her entire life proving the opposite. When the courthouse doors finally opened, the afternoon crowd straightened with quiet anticipation. Reporters lifted their cameras, neighbors lowered their conversations. Everyone expected a statement about business, real estate, or politics. Instead, the four brothers stepped onto the courthouse steps, carrying only the old cedar box. Ethan walked to the microphone first, but for several seconds he simply looked across the familiar faces filling the square. He recognized Mrs. Linda Foster standing near the front, now much older than she had been when she used to watch from her porch. Mr. Dawson leaned on a wooden cane beside her. Teachers, pastors, former classmates, and children from the local elementary school stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the warm Georgia sun. Ethan finally spoke, his voice calm, but filled with unmistakable emotion. Most of you know what we became. Very few of you know who made it possible. He gently rested one hand on the cedar box. Our mother did not leave us wealth. She left us something far more valuable. She taught us that being chosen can heal a heart for a lifetime. The square fell completely silent. Noah stepped beside him holding the small blue notebook. Many years ago, people believed four unwanted boys would become someone else's problem. She believed we would become someone else's blessing. He smiled softly before looking toward the old neighborhood where the little white house still stood beneath its familiar oak tree. She was right. Liam unfolded one of his childhood drawings, now carefully framed behind glass. The faded picture of five birds resting together caught the afternoon light. She kept everything, he said quietly. Every drawing, every report card, every small victory that we thought nobody noticed. He looked toward the children standing near the front of the crowd. Never underestimate what it means when one person notices you. Caleb stepped forward last. His firefighter badge rested over his heart, while the old participation ribbon from his first baseball season remained folded carefully inside his jacket pocket. When we were little, we thought she was making enormous sacrifices for us, he said. Today we discovered something different. She never called them sacrifices. She called them privileges. He smiled through tears. That changed how we see our own lives. The brothers exchanged a quiet glance before Ethan removed a folded document from the cedar box. Our mother asked us not to spend our lives trying to repay her. She asked us to become for someone else what she became for us. He paused as a gentle breeze carried fallen leaves across the courthouse lawn. We intend to honor that promise today. Behind the courthouse, several black curtains concealed a large sign that no one had noticed earlier. Noah nodded toward the town mayor, who stepped forward with a warm smile and pulled the rope. The curtains slipped away. Sunlight illuminated polished bronze letters mounted across a newly restored brick building directly across the street. Angela Brooks Children's Learning and Family Center. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. The abandoned community building that had sat empty for years had been completely transformed, without anyone realizing who had funded the renovation. Large windows reflected the blue autumn sky. Fresh flowers surrounded the entrance. Children's artwork already decorated the front hallway visible through the glass doors. Ethan continued speaking. This center will provide tutoring, counseling, meals, adoption support, scholarships, and after-school programs for children and families throughout this county. Every service will be offered free of charge. Noah smiled gently. Nobody should ever believe they are too expensive to love. Liam pointed toward the colorful mural painted across one wall of the building. 5 birds rested together on the roof of a little white house beneath a golden sunset. Every child present immediately recognized the warmth in the painting even without knowing its history. Caleb looked toward the crowd before quietly adding, "Our mother gave 4 frightened boys a home. We cannot give the whole world that same home. But perhaps we can give thousands of children the same beginning." Mrs. Linda Foster slowly removed her glasses to wipe away tears she no longer tried to hide. She remembered every doubtful word she had spoken years ago while watching Angela water flowers beside the porch. "Mr." Dawson quietly shook his head. "We thought she was raising 4 boys," he whispered. "She was raising 4 men who would lift an entire town." One by one, children began walking toward the new building, laughing as they climbed the freshly painted front steps. Their voices drifted across the square like music. The brothers stood together without speaking, watching families enter through doors that would remain open for generations to come. In that quiet moment, they finally understood the last lesson Angela had left behind. Love was never measured by how much a person held on to. Love became extraordinary only when it continued changing lives, long after the hands that first gave it had grown still. The first spring after the center opened, Ashcroft no longer looked quite the same. Every afternoon, the sound of children spilled across the sidewalks surrounding the old brick building. Bicycles lined the front rack. Colorful chalk drawings covered the concrete walkway. Parents gathered on wooden benches while volunteers carried books, backpacks, and trays of fresh sandwiches through the front doors. Inside, tutoring sessions filled one classroom, while another echoed with piano lessons donated by a retired music teacher. Down the hallway, Noah helped teenagers repair bicycles instead of throwing them away. Ethan visited twice each month to provide free health education for families who could not easily reach specialists. Liam covered empty walls with murals painted alongside local children, making sure every brushstroke belonged to someone who needed to believe their work mattered. Caleb organized safety workshops and summer camps, where confidence grew one small accomplishment at a time. None of the brothers placed their own names on the building. Every brochure, every scholarship certificate, every welcome sign carried only one name: Angela Brooks. One quiet afternoon, a little boy no older than 7 wandered into the lobby holding a stuffed rabbit with one ear stitched back together by careful hands. He stood beneath the large portrait hanging above the fireplace and studied the smiling woman in the photograph. Her yellow cardigan, gentle eyes, and warm smile made her seem less like a distant figure from history and more like someone who might step through the hallway carrying a plate of warm biscuits at any moment. The boy tugged gently on Ethan's sleeve. "Mister," he asked softly, "who is she?" Ethan looked up at the portrait and smiled with the same expression Angela had worn countless times around the old kitchen table. Before he could answer, Noah, Liam, and Caleb happened to walk into the lobby from different directions, each stopping beneath the portrait almost instinctively. For a moment, none of them spoke. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, bathing the room in soft golden light while children laughed somewhere deeper inside the building. Finally, Ethan knelt beside the little boy. "She was our mother," he said quietly. The child tilted his head. "Was she famous?" Noah smiled warmly. "Not to the world." Liam looked toward the painting of 5 birds hanging across the lobby wall. "She never appeared on television." Caleb glanced around the busy center filled with families who now found hope inside its walls. "But she changed more lives than most famous people ever will." The little boy looked back at the portrait for another long moment before smiling. "She looks kind." Ethan felt his throat tighten as memories drifted gently through his heart like familiar music. The smell of cinnamon pancakes before school. The squeak of the old porch swing at sunset. A patched couch where bedtime stories somehow felt grander than any theater. 4 extra lunch napkins folded every morning because Angela always believed someone else might need one. A hand resting quietly on his shoulder before every difficult exam. Noah remembered the old toolbox she bought instead of replacing her own worn-out shoes. Liam remembered the bluebirds nesting beneath the porch roof every spring because Angela refused to remove their home. Caleb remembered the day he realized he had forgotten his stuffed bear during an entire afternoon outside. And Angela simply smiled without pointing it out, because healing never needed applause. As evening slowly settled over Ashcroft, families began leaving the center one by one. The brothers locked the front doors together before walking across town toward the little white house that still stood beneath the old oak tree. They had restored every room exactly as Angela had left it. The dining table remained scratched. Liam's childhood drawing still rested inside the family Bible. 4 extra plates still waited inside the kitchen cabinet. Nothing had become a museum. Everything remained a home. They stepped onto the familiar porch just as the sun dipped below the trees, casting long golden shadows across the quiet yard. Without speaking, each brother sat in the same place he had favored as a child. A gentle breeze stirred the wind chimes hanging near the front door. Above them, 5 bluebirds landed quietly along the porch roof before settling into peaceful stillness. No one pointed toward them. No one needed to. Ethan looked across the fading light and whispered almost too softly to hear, "We came home, Mom." The others nodded silently. The porch remained still. The evening air carried the scent of blooming jasmine and freshly cut grass. Somewhere in the distance, children laughed as they walked home with their families. The old White House stood exactly where it always had, no longer remembered because it was small, but because inside its walls, one ordinary woman had quietly proved a truth powerful enough to outlive every passing season. Kindness does not become smaller when it is shared. It becomes the home that generations keep returning to, even long after the front door has gently closed for the night.